So I'd love to hear a little bit from all of you. If you just want to type into the chat your name, what program you're with, so we get a little bit of information about each other. And as you're doing that, I'm going to move on to talking about what we're going to cover today. So today our objectives are to learn a little bit about understanding what readiness to learn is and identifying some of the barriers in learning and getting an understanding of the strategies of how we can engage our learners. I see that we have some representatives from Intercambio and people from Emily Griffith with ESL. We've got a director here from Cavalry Open Door ESL. We've got some ELA folks at the Learning Source. So a lot of different groups representing here. Okay, a lot of adult ESL folks. Great. So we've got a good diversity of groups represented here. Some volunteer folks as well. All right, so Greg's got lots of experience as well here. State hospital, pre-COVID, the update for patients. Volunteer coalition. Okay, great. So lots of diversity and lots of different backgrounds we can pull together. So this should be a really exciting session. So thanks for putting that in. We're going to try and keep it engaging by interacting with each other. And I know all of you have gone through COVID and understand a little bit about connecting online and those type of things. So thanks for your willingness to engage with me. So talking a little bit about readiness to learn, I want you to think a little bit about, the time that you went through a change and what you needed to do that. I think about in my own life, really for my whole life, I've been wanting to learn Spanish, and I took Spanish when I was, going through my schooling in high school, and I know un poquito español, and it just never quite happens for me. So I'm trying to think about, what has been happening in my life that I just never quite make it there and get to the place where I'm fluent in Spanish. So I want you to think about an example in your own life, and how long have you been thinking about this change? And something you're comfortable sharing, of course, and put it in the chat and share it with us. What is it that you want to change? And start thinking about also, why haven't you been able to do it? What's holding you back? I give you a little time to kind of think through that and put it out there. Sometimes it's not as easy to think about what we want to do and what's holding us back. I see George Gregory's also having Spanish barriers. Okay. Sometimes there are opportunities to practice that aren't quite available. Okay, Diane is learning Russian. Technology. Yeah, Barbara, it's always, something we want to get as a useful tool, and it's not always easy. Oh, yes, learning to play music is something that you always want to do. And it's just, those times that you want to do it, and then it's not always something that comes to the front of your time and resource. I see Karen saying time, resource, and money hold you back for sure. Yeah. And Sharon says, learning Dari online program. Yeah, life just feels like it gets in the way. We have all these great visions of what we want to do, and then somehow just getting up in the morning seems to get in the way. Interesting. Okay, well, thanks for sharing some of that with me. I want to share a little bit with you about what can happen in that process. You know, we understand it just as it happens, right? I want to learn Spanish. I want to learn to play a musical instrument. And just stuff happens, right? So what is that in a more kind of technical manner? There's this philosophy or this idea called the stages of change, which is more formally the trans theoretical model. And it's part of a behavior change theory. And it says that when we make changes, we go through these various changes. So what happens is that they don't always have to happen in this same format or this same order, but when we really aren't thinking about making the change, we're in something called pre-contemplation, kind of like denial. I don't really need to have this happen. It's not important to me. And then sometime we are thinking about it more. We're contemplative about it. Maybe I want to do this, maybe I don't. And for me, Spanish, that happens all the time. Like I contemplate it, maybe this is more important to me. Like when I've been teaching ESL more, I really see how it would be valuable to me to really have more fluency in Spanish. And then we maybe hit a point where we're really more determined about it. We're motivated. Let's do it. Let's go. And at some point we turn into action. You know, I see in the chat some things about actively taking lessons, buying a keyboard, getting a guitar. And so we're actively taking steps to make that happen. Once we have integrated that change, we're considered in a maintenance. We're doing it. We're speaking Spanish with our learners, or we go to Russia and actually speak Russian. That would be amazing, right? So we do all those type of things. But sometimes we feel like we can't do that anymore. Maybe we learn to play a musical instrument and then we stop playing for a while and we lose all those skills we had. So we kind of relapse and we need to start again. So this can apply obviously to all sorts of things in our life. And we'll notice that it will happen with our learners who are learning English, or if they're going through a GED program or anything like that, right? So as you think through the things you put in the chat, think about where you are in that stage. If you've been through other stages, what has happened to put you into those stages and kind of what that barrier was. Okay. And we can think more about this, and we're going to consider what's preventing that. So are there any questions that people have about this process and how it applies to behavior change? Okay.
I'm not seeing anything in the chat, Kara.
Okay. Well, let's think through a little bit more about the barriers that can happen. We, talked a little bit about how it can be difficult to make those changes. So I want you to consider what's preventing you from making that happen. So in my life, and I saw some of this happen in the chat, it's just not a priority for me. I think about how Spanish might be important for me to work with my second language learners. I think about, I have a niece who is fluent in Spanish. And when she was young in particular, I thought, oh, wouldn't it be wonderful to be able to speak with her in Spanish. Now that she's older and she's, fluent in English, it feels like it's not as important for me. So as you think about some of these changes, I want you to share a little bit about what has prevented you. I know I had seen time as a barrier for you. What other type of things are preventing you? Okay, discouragement, distraction. Mm-hmm. Okay, it's hard to make other time. Procrastination, oh man, that'll get you for sure. Yeah, and there's too much to do. Okay, Channing, thanks for sharing that. Sometimes it's just that fear factor. Okay. So we have an idea of what types of things might prevent us. I want you to put yourself in the view of your own learners and think about what your learners might be experiencing, or someone learning a new language. If you're a tutor, for example, what might be a barrier for them? How does it parallel your experience? What other types of barriers might they have that you don't have? And you can put that into the chat. Okay, trauma. Interesting. Childcare, yeah, that can definitely be a big barrier to be able to be present in classes. Transportation. Yeah, the time and resources and family obligations for sure. A new culture, yeah, that's a great one to think about. Overwhelmed by navigating. Yeah, Joanne thinks that there isn't a resource to be able to just to do it with, to practice with. Oh, Dorothea, thanks. And someone who actually is saying, I don't want you to do this. Someone who's literally not supportive, that can absolutely be a barrier. Great. Yeah, so it can be, there can be barriers outside of just what's going on within that person in terms of this is a struggle to do it. There can be external barriers and pressures that are literally saying this is not okay. And trying to adapt to being in the US for sure. Yeah. So it can be very challenging to make this change and think about learning English, for sure. And if they're learning other skills outside of English, if they're in an GED program and things like that, being supportive of those changes and trying to learn those strategies. So let's think a little bit about how we might be able to support them and engage them. So some of the things that we can do to effectively engage learners are to look at some of those barriers that are coming up and try to overcome them. So one of them might be trying to increase the importance, because some of the things that we've been addressing are that it doesn't feel important enough. I saw that repeated in the chat over and over again, right? There are other priorities in my life. This doesn't quite reach the level of importance. So how can we help them identify this as an important thing in their life? So we can use things like reflections and open questions to highlight to learners the values that they have in their life to demonstrate the importance of this learning. Also, their confidence. I saw again at several points in the chat that maybe I don't feel like I have the ability to do this. I'm not quite as confident in my own skills. So again, things like reflections and open questions to really evoke from those learners that they do have these skills and we can support them in those areas where they're not feeling like they can do it. They have the ability. It's something they can learn. Using empathy to reflect and acknowledge those emotions and maybe unstated concerns that they have. Right? It's okay to feel that way. It's okay to feel that this is a difficult thing. And then the fourth one of normalizing, that's absolutely normal. And sometimes what I have found is that my learners feel like they're the only one who's having a hard time. everyone else gets it, and they are the only person struggling. So to help them understand that it's normal, they're not alone in their experience, and it's okay to be experiencing what they're going through, can actually be very helpful to connect them with a broader group of individuals. Also, just using open-ended questions, the who, what, where, why, when, what we learned to write our essays, to give a deeper understanding for us as the facilitators, as the instructors of what the learner is experiencing, can then help us to implement those other strategies. What questions do you have that I can further explore with some of this? Just pause here for a moment. In general, I would say that you want to use the strategies that fit the learner's barriers. All of these can be effective. Some might be more effective in certain circumstances. I see a note about what open questions mean, and thanks for that, Erlinda. We're going to dive into that as we move forward. And that, English language learners are trying to adapt with living in the US. What does being accepted, mean? Trying to get more information about that. So, as you're working with people, the change will come from the learner. You're trying to support them. You can't make them do it. What you're doing is helping them feel more comfortable, and from doing that, they are going to move forward. So, these reflections, these open questions that we'll evaluate more fully as we move forward, can be supported with all of the different strategies. So, let's move forward, and we'll dive into each of these a little bit more deeply. So, empathetic reflections are just a statement that can reflect the words or thoughts or feelings that the learner has. And this is a way to build a connection, showing that you're understanding what that person has gone through. And expressing empathy is a way to understand what that person has gone through. So you're listening for what the person has experienced, or maybe hasn't shown you, that they're not saying out loud, but it's kind of an educated guess. Without asking a question, you're making it as a statement. So let's look some more deeply at some examples. So maybe the learner says to you, I didn't finish my homework. Okay. So we want to think about kind of what's going on here, right? And I saw some of the things in the chat about what could be a barrier to finishing homework. So if we can think about how we can what statements we can make that can increase confidence, that can demonstrate the importance of this, we can make statements such as, you wanted to do the homework, right? Learning English is important to you. So instead of saying, why didn't you finish your homework? You should have finished your homework, right? We're going to acknowledge the fact that they weren't able to, but we're going to support the fact that it is important to them, and they can do it. And that can help identify from us what's happening. Okay. So reflections are statements. We're not making a question. And as English language teachers, we know that in general, questions have an upward inflection, right? So we want to inflect down. You wanted to do the homework, not you wanted to do the homework, you wanted to do the homework. So we're conveying to them a statement rather than a question. Okay? Although we are making a guess about what's happening. And it's okay if we're wrong. If we're wrong and they didn't actually want to do the homework, they'll tell us. They'll say, no, I didn't want to, or I didn't have time. We get more information by responding to them in this way. What questions can I answer about using reflections, and what thoughts do you have about how this might work with your learners? Well, I'd like us to do an activity here. We're going to break into some groups, and we have some learner statements. I wrote my daughter teacher note on Tuesday in English. I can't talk English to different people. So these are examples of potential statements from students that you might have in an ESL class. And I want you to, as a group, come together with a reflection that you might make to each of these statements. And think about how you can go through, as with the previous example, and create reflections that might be able to increase the confidence and importance and identify what's going on. Why did your learner make this statement? What could normalize fears, and how you might respond to them in that way. Okay. If you have any time remaining, you're going to share the statements of learners that you've had in your class outside of these two. You can develop some other ones. So I'll give you 10 minutes to go through that. Any questions about what's going to happen in this activity? So welcome back, everyone. I was kind of working through the groups and I heard some great conversations. Anything that people might like to share about what happened in your breakout sessions?
If you use the reactions button at the bottom of your screen, folks, there's a raise the hand. It will appear in your window so that Kara knows who's wanting to speak.
Gregory, I really liked what you had to say. I added it in the chat if you want to talk about yours. Like, what are some things you are good at?
Sure. My internet connection is not going to. I don't know if you guys can hear me okay. You guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Awesome. So yeah, I'll just share very quickly that to ask the parent that wrote that letter to think about something that they are good at doing right now, whether that's in work or maybe the language learners here in America, PhDs in their home country or very professionals. The whole process when they started that activity or that field in which they are good at doing, on that adage that every expert was once a beginner. And I know myself and others, even though we have many examples of this experience of being very good at something, we tend to forget emotionally and even factually process how often embarrassed we process what we're now good at doing. So I would just try to ask a series of questions to help the parent remember just that whole process. You know, how many times did you want to give up? How many times did you feel stupid? How many times did you feel embarrassed? And to try to transfer that memory over to the now present journey of them trying to learn English as a way to encourage them, motivate them, and help them stay perseverant in the long journey. So those were kind of my thoughts.
Yeah, thank you, Gregory. Absolutely. We all have lots of life experience that we can carry over and learn. Just because we're struggling in what we're trying to learn and accomplish in the moment, English, for example, doesn't mean we can't carry over those journeys and expressions and life lessons. For sure. Yeah.
Kara, I accidentally muted you. Please unmute yourself. There
I
you go.
heard from some of the other groups talking about how the recognition of those skills across even other things in English. For example, the example of the writing the note to the teacher. Some of our language learners are very skilled in one area, maybe not another. To the example of what Gregory was bringing up, you know, they may be very skilled in their written experience, but not so good in their verbal. And so to acknowledge their strengths and abilities to do that can help build up their overall confidence that they do have the ability to do this. It's a matter of pulling all levels up together. So that can be very helpful. So check through the note comments here. Yeah, remembering things you first learned. I see that Channing's adding, and Karen, empathetic reflections about you wanting to communicate with the teacher. That was really hard. So acknowledging what they've done. The teacher understands you. It was scary. So what is that emotional element that the learner didn't say, but probably is feeling, can really build a connection with them? Yeah, it takes courage to reach out. Yeah, what doesn't work for you? So challenging them to reach for solutions. Excellent thoughts, you guys. Thanks for really doing some work there. Fantastic. So let's think a little bit about, it looks like I'm not sharing anymore. Let me reshare my screen here. Okay. Let's think about the open questions and how we can integrate those into what we're doing. So open questions, unlike closed questions, are encouraging a broad latitude of responses. Whereas as an instructor, sometimes we want to be very strategic in using a closed question because we want to know, do you actually know the answer to this? Yes or no, right? But sometimes with an open question, we're going to get a lot more information. Things that start with a who, what, where, why, when, how. Those can be very important to help us get more information as to where the learner is at. Okay. Someone had asked the question earlier on about what open questions are. So examples here about this, I didn't finish my homework again. So we talked about how we can use a reflection for that, but we could also use an open question to try and get more information. So thinking about, again, what the barriers might be, we could use the open question. Who might be able to support you with your homework? What was difficult for you? Where do you do your homework? Because we talked about maybe they don't have available space, time, whatever. What did you have, or why did you have difficulty? When do you think you could finish it? So kind of challenging them to, I think someone had just put in the chat about reaching, oh, it's Barbara, reaching for solutions, right? When do you think you could finish it? And how can I help you? So making you a resource for them. Okay, so lots of different ways we could approach this, but here are some examples. Okay, so we're going to break into groups again, and I have those statements again. I wrote my daughter teacher a note on Tuesday, same ones. I can't talk English to different people, but I want you to think about writing some statements, writing some open questions at this time. Okay, any questions about what you're going to do? All right, I heard some good discussions in there. What are your thoughts about how that went and how you might be able to implement it in your working with your learners?
Again, I would ask people to mute themselves and to raise hands for questions. In the reactions icon at the bottom, you'll find the hand raising icon.
Karen.
Yeah, Kara, I just want to say in our small group, I was typing people's ideas in the chat and then I saved the chat and they were requesting that I pass that on.
Okay.
So can I send that? I'll try to clean it up in a document of like our examples we came up with and send it to you.
That'd be great.
I can share in our group. We kind of went back to what we discussed in the first part, as Gregory mentioned, you know, what is something you can do well? And, you know, think about those steps you took to get there. We thought about having them do even like a journaling activity, maybe creating some questions, and having them journal about something they can do well and the steps they took to learn it and become successful at it. We even mentioned maybe having them write it in their first language as just, you know, a thing to do at home to really, I don't know, think about the steps they took. And then maybe later writing it in English or having it as some type of progress report where they write in the first week about something they do well and then look back at it halfway through the term or later and see if they can improve on that journal or things like that. So that was one of our ideas.
Yeah, thanks, Channing. That sounds interesting. I think it was you and your group talking about how to implement this with low-level learners.
Yes.
I haven't worked with level 1 or 0 in a long time. I worked with level 2 for a while. And one of the things that I did was give them a chart that they kept. I just used index cards, and I would have them keep track of kind of their goal setting for the 4 major quadrants of, you know, reading, writing, speaking, listening. And I would have them set goals. Kind of on a scale of 1 to 5, how good are you now to where do you want to be? And I would have them like rate themselves. And that felt like it was manageable at that level, you know, like I'm really good, I'm bad kind of thing that you could communicate that. And I would give them like stars, right? Give yourself a star. How good am I? And then I would say, where do you want to be? And we would do that. Like I did it like every lesson at the end of every, you know, chapter session. And then we would kind of say, okay, where are you now? Where do you want to be? And it wasn't totally getting to that open questions, but it was working towards that.
Yeah, no, I like that. I think I could incorporate it with some of my levels.
If you can at least get to thumbs up, thumbs down.
If I could add to Channing's comment about the best group room 6, I'm joking, but if I can add to that, Diane had mentioned something that she does with her students where she encourages them to write as much as they can in English, but when they get to a word that they don't know in English, they just go ahead and insert their home language for that word. And so you kind of have a combination of English in their native language. And what's really cool is Channing brought up the idea of journaling. So if they're journaling in that combination format, English in their home language, you know, a week from now, a month from now, 3 months from now, they can look back at their initial entries into their journal and see the progress that they've made. And so that is just a great way to combat those ubiquitous feelings that we all feel when we're trying to learn something. We feel like we're idiots. We feel embarrassed. We feel like we're not making progress in spite of all the work that they're doing. But in the journal, it will give empirical, hard evidence that, oh man, I can see how much more English I'm using in my newer entries compared to my initial entries. And so I just really like the combination of those two ideas, Channing's journaling and Diane's combination of both languages in the journal.
Yeah,
Thank
these
you,
are great
Dorothy, for that.
ideas. I
Kara,
know we're at the end here. I think that's what Dorothea is trying to tell me. So
Yeah.
I'm just gonna leave you with, on your own, please think about these things.
All right.